Okay, so it's 11:30, and I'm not sure if everybody can hear us or um, if everything is working, but if assuming everything is working, yeah, this session is on veterans homelessness, really focusing on shallow subsidies. So I wanted to make sure everybody is in the right place, and thank you for the confirmation um, that you can hear us. So the purpose of this panel is really to learn more about the SSVF Shallow Subsidy program. That program provides rental assistance to very low income and extremely low income veteran households who are enrolled in SSVF's rapid rehousing or homeless prevention projects. This session will provide information on how the program works to support veterans in crisis. So we're very fortunate to have three great speakers with us on this panel today. So first, we have Zoe Lewis, who's the Program Director for Veteran Services at Catholic Charities Hawaii. And Zoe is a Program Director, again, for Veteran Services. She oversees the SSVF program and the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program. She's been involved in the initiative to end veteran homelessness on Oahu since 2016. Our next panelist is Esther Lamotia, who is the SSVF Coordinator for US Vets. And Esther has been with US Vets for 8 years and has an extensive background working with nonprofits. Graduating with her master's degree in business, she landed a job with Volunteer Legal Services Hawaii, where she served as their program manager for 10 years, assisting low-income families accessing legal services with the support of volunteer attorneys. In addition to working in the legal services field, Esther also worked with Family Programs Hawaii to support children who needed a temporary placement home until they can reunite with family or be placed with long-term housing. Since her employment with US Vets, she started with SSVF when the grant was first awarded to US Vets, then transitioned into the workforce development assisting veterans with employment program. Recently, Esther was promoted to lead the SSVF department, and since then the program has grown with extending shallow subsidy services to the neighbor islands as well as to Oahu. And then finally, we're joined by Lindsay Kamahela, who's the homeless programs, who represents homeless programs at the VA. So Lindsay is a coordinated entry specialist and LCSW with homeless programs at the VA. And as a CES specialist, Lindsay represents the VA in leading efforts to end veterans homelessness with the community alongside the COC. Lindsay has experience working with diverse populations, such as those who are homeless, those with substance use disorders, those with serious and persistent mental illness. So that being said, I'll turn it over to Zoe, and Zoe can get us started. So Zoe.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone. We're glad you chose this session. My name is Zoe Lewis. I am Program Director at Catholic Charities Hawaii, overseeing our veterans programs. So today in this session, we are providing you with an overview of a housing intervention called Shallow Subsidies. And we're calling this a path towards housing stability for veterans because we believe that shallow subsidies are the future of rapid rehousing. And today we're going to share our experience providing shallow subsidies for the past few years and hopefully demonstrate for you the value of this type of progressive housing intervention. So here's our agenda for this session. We'll start with an overview of the SSVF program, which is the program that provides shallow subsidies for veterans. We'll describe for you what a shallow subsidy is, and we will demonstrate how it works with examples. We'll dive into the data that demonstrates the need for a housing intervention like shallow subsidy. And we will present some shallow subsidy success stories for you. Finally, we'll wrap up with Q&A. So that's what's on tap for this session today. To start, we want to provide a very basic overview of SSVF, which is the supportive services for veteran families, because SSVF is the funding source that has been providing shallow housing subsidies to veterans in our community for the past few years. So SSVF was established in 2011 by the Department of Veterans Affairs The program was authorized under the Obama administration. So SSVF is a federal program and it is funded through the VA. SSVF is a housing program for veterans who are experiencing literal homelessness or veterans who are at risk for homelessness. So veterans must be in a houseless or an at-risk situation to qualify for SSVF. SSVF is targeted towards low-income veterans. Low income means veterans that have an income at 50% area median income or below. Just for context, the 50% area median income limit for Honolulu County for this year is a little over $42,000 per year for a one-person household. So really, that's all to say that this program is designed to target veterans who are low income. And what SSVF does is the program provides short-term rental assistance and case management to veterans with the goal of achieving housing stability. I want to emphasize that SSVF is a rapid rehousing program, meaning this program is not a long-term supportive housing program. We're not a voucher program like Section 8 or HUD-VASH. And this program is not designed to provide ongoing supportive case management services. This is an important distinction to understand before we talk about the shallow housing subsidies. SSVF is really targeted towards veterans who need time-limited financial assistance and light touch case management. So SSVF is not appropriate for veterans who need a supportive housing resource like HUD-VASH or a Housing First voucher. Veterans who need a high level of care are not appropriate for SSVF. And I think this is an important distinction to make. So what does SSVF look like in our community? Well, we have two SSVF programs in Hawaii. Both of these programs have been in operation since SSVF was authorized by Congress in 2011. US Vets is located at Barbers Point, and their SSVF program serves Oahu as well as Kauai, Maui, and the Big Island. Catholic Charities is located in Honolulu, and their SSVF program serves Oahu. Both of these agencies have been operating SSVF programs for 10 years plus, and both have successfully housed hundreds of veterans using this funding. US Vets and Catholic Charities have both played a central role, along with HUD-VASH and other partners, of course, in the decrease we have seen in the number of veterans experiencing homelessness in our community. So now that we've given some context for SSVF as a program, let's get to shallow subsidies, which is the reason we're here today. In 2019, the VA authorized additional SSVF money to provide a new service called Shallow Subsidies. It's important to note that Shallow Subsidies is considered a service provided under SSVF, and it's not an altogether new program. So essentially, the VA told SSVF programs, we have this new policy initiative that we're calling Shallow Subsidies, and we want you to use this additional money to implement it. Then, due to the nationwide success of Shallow Subsidies, the VA authorized even more money for Shallow Subsidies recently in 2021. The VA recognized how successful Shallow Subsidies has been, and they wanted to allocate additional money to expand this type of housing intervention. So what that means is that now both Hawaii grantees, US Vets, and Catholic Charities have ongoing funding to provide Shallow Subsidies. And before we go kind of any further into the presentation, I want to be very clear about our intention with this presentation today at the conference. This is not an in-service or a chance for us to, advertise to you that we have Shallow Subsidies available and that you should refer your veteran clients to us. That certainly might be a secondary purpose, and we're always here to answer questions and help you with your clients. But our main purpose here today is really to describe to you what Shallow Subsidies is and to share with you how successful this intervention has been, because we want you to join us in being advocates for this type of intervention. We want you to understand how successful this housing intervention has been for veterans in our community. And we want to convince you that this type of intervention should be expanded and offered to other populations in Hawaii. So the purpose of our presentation today really is advocacy. Let's get into the details. What is a shallow subsidy? So a shallow subsidy is a portion of rent that is paid directly to a landlord on behalf of a client. So in that sense, shallow subsidy is similar to a housing voucher. We calculate the subsidy amount by taking 50% of the total rent, and the total rent must meet rent reasonableness standards. I'll show you an example of the calculation on the next slide. But we determine rent reasonableness by doing a market study of rents for comparable units of the same size in the same geographic area. So for example, if a client wanted to sign a lease on a studio apartment in Waikiki and the total monthly rent was $5,000, this unit would not meet rent reasonableness standards. The rent reasonableness standard for a studio in Waikiki is about $1,900 right now. So in order for the unit to be eligible for the shallow subsidy, it needs to be at or under the rent reasonableness standard. And the subsidy is provided for 24 months or 2 years total. So here's an example of the subsidy calculation. So client signs a lease for a 1-bedroom unit in Waikiki with a total monthly rent of $1,600. Just for reference, the rent reasonableness standard for 1 bedroom in Waikiki is about $2,000 per month. So yes, this unit meets rent reasonableness standards. So the shallow subsidy amount we calculate is $800, and we just get that calculation by taking 50% of $1,600 to equal $800. So in this example, SSVF would pay $800 per month in rental assistance for 2 years, and the veteran would pay the remaining balance of rent. Let's look at another example. This is Keala. This is not a real client, guys. I literally Googled female veteran. It's a stock image photo. Some of you are like, oh, do I know this person? No, this is just a fake client to demonstrate this example. So Keala is a Navy veteran. She's 37 years old. She's a single mother with 2 young children. They're sheltered at Family Promise, and they're referred to SSVF through the coordinated entry system. So the family's current income is $285 in veterans benefits and $2,000 a month from Keala's job. So in total, the family has about $2,300 in income every month, and that wouldn't include any SNAP benefits. So this is a low income family. They're not zero income, but they are certainly low income. They fall under 50% AMI. And even though this is a fake client, you know, this is not an unreasonable scenario. We serve veterans like Keala all the time. So through assistance from the SSVF housing specialist, Keala manages to secure a 2-bedroom unit for rent near Pearl Ridge. The monthly rent for this unit is $1,650, and this rent amount does meet rent reasonableness standards for IAEA. So SSVF would pay $825 each month in rental subsidy, and Keala would pay the remaining $825 each month. And Keala will keep this subsidy for 2 years. Granted, she manages her portion of the rent, she doesn't terminate her lease or get evicted or whatnot. So you can see that this subsidy is going to help Keala a lot. This subsidy is going to make this housing affordable for Keala and her children. This subsidy means that she's paying just over 30% of her income towards rent. Without the subsidy, this housing would be unaffordable. It would be unsustainable for Keala. So the subsidy is going to increase her chances of maintaining this housing because her rental cost burden is decreased. So we want Keala to sustain her housing. We do not want to see her and her children in a homeless situation again. I want to take a moment to talk about the requirements of a veteran when they are receiving shallow subsidy and the length of time we provide a subsidy, because if there's one thing I want you to take away from this part of the presentation, it is this message. I'm going to describe to you why this subsidy is different than other housing subsidies, and I'm going to tell you why I think it works. As I said, the SSVF Shallow Subsidy is provided to the veteran for 2 years. Granted, they maintain their unit. But during those 2 years, there is no requirement that the veteran resubmits income verification. So what that means is that if the veteran's income increases during those 2 years, even if that increase puts them now over 50% area median income, they still maintain their subsidy. And the result is that veterans are encouraged to increase their income while in the program because they will not lose their housing subsidy. This is a very different strategy than the one employed by traditional housing subsidy programs. For Section 8, income and family composition is recertified every year or every time the tenant has any change in income. It's the same with Housing First programs, as far as I understand. And in those programs, if the tenant's income increases over the income limit, then they can lose their housing voucher. The result of all of this is that tenants are encouraged to stay under the income threshold in order to maintain their housing, which frankly is understandable. Housing is expensive and the voucher is really helpful. But tenants in these traditional housing programs, they may feel incentivized to maintain their income at current levels so that they keep their voucher. SSVF, we want to do the opposite. We want to incentivize folks to increase their income, to break the cycle of poverty, and to not be afraid to report changes to their worker, and to treat the program as a stepping stone to housing stability and financial independence. I want to go back to Keala for a moment to illustrate this point for you. So Keala has her subsidy and she and her children are housed. What happens now? Well, Keala will work with the case manager to develop a service plan, and this service plan will include maintaining her portion of rent. It will include contributing to a savings account. And in Keala's situation, she's a veteran that is able to work. So the service plan will include enrolling in a homeless veterans reintegration program, which is the Department of Labor sponsored employment program for veterans. And in HVRP, Keala can pursue a long-term career goal. Now remember, Keala is already working. She qualified for SSVF Shallow Subsidy with about $2,000 per month in employment income. But for her to really be financially independent, she's going to have to increase the amount that she is bringing home monthly. And usually that means pursuing a career goal that may require training, and it may take some time for Keala to transition into a higher paying job. So eventually the outcome we want is that Keala secures higher paying employment and is ready to transition off of the subsidy at the end of the 2 years. Not every veteran on SSVF Shallow Subsidy is in Keala's situation. So here is another common situation that we see in Shallow Subsidy. Often we serve senior aged veterans or disabled veterans, and these are folks that are not able to work and they live on a fixed income. So in this scenario, increasing the veteran's income is really unlikely. So the service plan for these folks will include applying for the established housing programs such as Section 8, public housing, and senior housing. For someone who is on a fixed income, this is really the most appropriate long-term plan. And we know that the wait list for this program, for these programs, can be years. So for these veterans, Shallow Subsidy is really a bridge program to a longer-term housing voucher. So what do the numbers say locally? Well, for US vets, 84% of the households served in Shallow Subsidy have maintained their housing since the start of the subsidy, which is awesome. And the success rate is 100% for Catholic Charities. This is not to compare the two organizations, because Catholic Charities has a much smaller program and has only served 4 households in Shallow Subsidy since 2019, whereas US Vets has served 51 households. But this is really just to demonstrate that Shallow Subsidy has been incredibly successful. It has been a game changer for veterans who struggle to find housing stability. So that concludes our introduction to Shallow Subsidy. And now I will turn it over to Lindsay, who will go more in depth with a data analysis.
Thanks, Zoe. So I'm Lindsay Kaumeheiva, and I'm a social worker with the VA Homeless Program. Go next slide. So who are Honolulu's homeless veterans? So I pulled a HMIS by name report on the 9th of this month. So this is our veteran by name list. Please understand that, we're always working on our data quality. Most of this information is self-reported. And there's also sometimes some user errors when entering data. So take everything I say with a little grain of salt. Next slide. So looking at the by name list, on the day I polled, there were 216 homeless veterans on this report. There were 107 that were chronic homeless or met the definition of chronic homelessness. So the by name list, it's a comprehensive list of every person in the community experiencing homelessness in real time. So this list is changing day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. And our veteran by name list is the general community by name list, and it's filtered for individuals that self-report as a veteran. Next slide. So when looking at our by name list for household type, there were 193 veterans that were individuals and 23 that were families. So when looking at sheltered versus unsheltered, there were 79 veterans that were sheltered, or 37%, and 137 veterans that were unsheltered, or 63%. Next slide. So when it comes to gender, 194 veterans identified as a male, 19 identified as a female, and 3 identified as something other than male or female. And when you look at the age distribution, you can see that there are 42 veterans between the ages of 26 and 40, and it sort of increases between 41 and 64. And there's 44 veterans that are above the age of 65 and are currently homeless, which is pretty large. It's a huge number. Next slide. So veterans and average self-reported income. So this is the income that they reported. And it may not be fully accurate, but it's what they reported. So out of the 216 veterans that are currently on the by name list, 69 veterans reported that they had no income. 147 veterans reported that they did have an income, and the average income of those veterans were $1,609.75, or that's only $19,317 annually. Next slide. So some other interesting data from this by name list report that I pulled. So 91 of the veterans, or 42%, have been homeless for longer than 12 months. For the month of October, the inflow of veterans entering homelessness was 20. So 13 were veterans that are new to our by name list and potentially we have never encountered before. 4 veterans returned from being housed. So these veterans could have fallen out of a program, potentially because of a high rent burden once they were exited from the program. We don't really have enough information to speculate. 3 returned from being inactive, so not engaging with a program. And when you look at prioritization categories based on the BI SPDAT on the by name list, there were 58 veterans that met the criteria for needing permanent supportive housing and 158 that needed either rapid rehousing or transitional housing. And individuals with lower vulnerability or VI SPDAT scores and that fall in the rapid rehousing and transitional housing category, they may have less complex needs and not need intensive case management. They may only require financial assistance because of the high cost of their living expenses. Next slide. So 78,401. So according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, who put out a report, this is the annual income that's required to rent a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent in Honolulu and not pay more than 30% of their income. So translated, that's $37.69 an hour, or $6,533 monthly. So if you remember, I reported that the average self-reported income for veterans on our by name list was $1,609. and Keala made only $2,300 a month. So you can see that, receiving the shallow subsidy and covering 50% of FMR, it's a real big deal for these veterans and is very helpful. Next slide. Okay. So Hawaii and the cost of living. So it's a well-known fact that, living in Hawaii, it's very expensive. Many struggle and have a hard time making ends meet. There's an increase in cost to ship goods here to the islands, and of course, increased inflation. So the cost of just groceries, goods, rent, and other necessities, it's going to continue to rise. So the US Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out a report on the Consumer Price Index. And this is a measure of the average change in prices over time in a fixed market basket of goods and services. So for urban consumers in Honolulu, they reported that prices in the Honolulu area increased by 1% for the last 2 months ending in September 2021. So this increase was influenced by higher prices for food and shelter. And over the last 12 months, it increased by 5%, which is pretty significant. Next slide. So in summary, what is it I'm trying to get at related to our homeless veterans and Hawaii's cost of living? So not one size fits all. We know that one housing resource or subsidy doesn't work to house and keep housed all homeless veterans. Elderly veterans also, they're not likely to be able to increase their income at this point in their lives, and many are on fixed incomes, as Zoe had kind of demonstrated earlier. Other veterans that maybe are employed full-time, they just don't make a high enough salary or wage to pay their rent or for their other living expenses. So additionally, while the majority of rapid rehousing participants will remain housed after the program ends, some will find themselves struggling because of the high rent burden after program exit. And some may even become homeless again. So although a veteran is earning income and no longer needs case management, their instability will continue without this financial assistance, why it's such a great program. So a shallow subsidy, it provides, just the right sized option between rapid rehousing and no support. It can be used for homeless prevention. Low and very low income households are able to provide for other basic needs and pay other bills, which will keep them housed. And another thing to look at is shallow subsidy programs. They cost less than the traditional rental assistance programs, such as Section 8 or HUD-VASH, and they require less intensive case management. And this allows providers to serve a greater number of households, so potentially ending homelessness for a larger amount of homeless veterans. And so that was my summary, and I'm going to pass it on to Esther, who's going to talk about some of the success stories of SSVF Shallow Subsidy.
Thank you, Lindsay. Next slide. Good morning. Good afternoon now. My name is Esther Lamatia. I am the SSVF Program Coordinator for US Vets. US Vets Shallow Subsidy Services started October 2019. We were able to serve 51 households with shallow subsidy services. And of the 51 served, 11 of the household were rapid rehousing, and 27 of that 51 household were homeless prevention. From October 2019 until today, we discharged 13 veterans from SSVF due to different reasons. If you look at the graph on the right side, it gives you the reasons why these veterans were discharged. Not all of them were negative, but 3 of our veterans were discharged because they were awarded Section 8 voucher, and of course, our HUD-VASH voucher as well. And while these veterans were receiving shallow subsidy services, Their case manager assisted them with applying for Section 8 voucher and also working with our HUD-VASH team to evaluate and assess applying due to needing a higher level of services that SSVF can provide. 5 of the vendors that were discharged due to non-compliance. 2 of them moved back to the mainland, living with family members for more support. So they were able to find family members in the mainland and were able to move there. And 3 of our household was able to maintain permanent housing on their own without shallow subsidy services after their 2 years of using this service. So our success rate for shallow subsidy services is 84%, which shows that there is a need for the services that we are providing in helping our veterans in maintaining permanent housing long term. Next slide. Some lessons learned during the year of us providing services, shallow subsidy services. Um, Of course, the first one was rents increasing. As Lindsay mentioned, the cost of living in Paradise is very high. And of course, many struggles to make ends meet. The rent continues to rise here on the island according to the data from Apartment List. Hawaii rents statewide are increasing faster than the national average, which caused problems for some of our clients receiving shallow subsidy services. 2 of our clients had a huge increase in their rent a few months ago, $300 more than what they were paying. So this made it difficult for these veterans to be able to pay for their portion of the rent. And of course, as a service provider and as a case manager, we assisted these veterans to move to a unit that were affordable for them so they can continue to sustain their permanent housing. The second one, we had clients that were transitioned back to our traditional SSVF program because they were unable to pay for their portion of the rent due to loss of income. Another one, a client needed a higher medical need. Another client didn't have the motivation to find employment, and because of that, we had transitioned them back to our regular SSVF to assist them with paying their rent. These clients are working with their case manager to get them back on track. We're increasing their income and helping them with any other barriers that is preventing them from paying their rent. It is important to have a backup plan and resources in place for our shallow subsidy clients. And the reason for that is there will be clients that fall short on paying for their rent because, of different circumstances. And it is important for us to have those resources in place to be able to help them pay for their portion of the rent. And that will help them continue to maintain their shallow subsidy services. We had a few clients who fall short on paying for their portion of the rent because, their hours were cut short from work. One of them lost employment. Another client because of the death of a family member, and so on. And when this happens, we reach out to other resources in the community that will be able to assist with paying their portion of the rent instead of transferring them back to our traditional SSVF program. And the goal for shallow subsidy services is to maintain these clients in that program. In that way, they can be accountable for paying that half of the portion of their rent. And of course, engagement. In our in our traditional SSVF program, clients need to engage with their program. So meaning we do weekly and monthly follow-up on their individual housing plan goals. The case manager would have a monthly meeting and most of the time multiple meetings with a client on a month-to-month to make sure that they are working towards their goals, and for case manager to be able to provide resources and assistance in helping the client meet those goals. So there's a lot more involvement made by our case managers in helping our client in our traditional SSVF. But when the client is transferred to shallow subsidy services, we found that there is a lot more disengagement from the client, more likely due to lightened case management with the service. Shallow subsidy services is supposed to be a light touch case management, but we found out that it's not always the case. So it's important to look at the referral and, when you're receiving referral, making sure that the vendor is ready for light touch case management. And the goal is to help setting them up for success long term. And we need to be careful when transferring clients from traditional SSVF to shallow subsidy services. People can become disengaged more when it's just a month-to-month check-in. And it can be a little bit more difficult to keep them on track and helping them meet those goals and providing them with referral resources. So because it's a 2-year services, people sometimes skew away from from those goals that is set for them. So it can be really difficult and challenging for case managers to be able to continue to help the client. It is important that we communicate the program expectation when providing this services to our veterans every chance we have, just to keep them grounded in their goals. And the last one, it is important for us to secure wraparound services for our clients. The more people in the pool to assist our clients to gain access, the better it is for them to be able to sustain their unit. And also to be able to have support from different angles, from different services providers while they're in permanent housing. Next slide. So I'll be going over some success stories from our shallow subsidy services. So the first and second client, they both had similar story. So the two different rapid rehousing household both were permanently housed with our traditional SSVF assistance. Both of the head of household were either disabled or they were retired. We were able to transition these households to shallow subsidy services after providing, after assisting them with our traditional SSVF program. And while they were receiving shallow subsidy services, our case managers helped them apply for Section 8. Both of those households got approved for Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher. Now both households were able to remain permanently housed in their current unit with ongoing housing subsidy with Section 8. Next slide. The third client is a rapid rehousing household, permanently housed with traditional SSVF program as well. We transitioned this veteran to shallow subsidy services. Then this veteran fell out of contact with our SSVF case manager and relapsed due to a major life event. So when client fell behind on their portion of the rent and was referred to HUD-VASH to needing a higher level of care. Client was then transitioned back. We transitioned this client back to our traditional SSVF to help pay for all rental arrears, so client could be eligible for HUD-VASH. Client was assessed by HUD-VASH and was able to maintain her housing with combined assistance from our SSVF and also HUD-VASH. Next slide, please. So client number 4 is a homeless prevention household that was able to sustain permanent housing with our traditional SSVF assistance. So we transitioned this veteran to shallow subsidy services, but this veteran began to encounter legal issues with current landlord. Client was relocated out of the original unit and to temporary month-to-month unit while continuing to work with our SSVF to find other alternative permanent housing. Next slide. And that's it. And we're gonna open it for any questions.
So,
for
Esther, there actually is a question in the chat, which I think can be for any of the panelists. And so someone had written that they're interested in learning about the referral process to refer homeless veterans or non-homeless veterans to seek services for SSVF. And this person actually works at Helping Hands Hawaii with their SNAP outreach program, and is interested because they also want to, possibly partner with the program. They often come across individuals who are veterans. So if you can speak to that and also share if the information is also available online.
So for US vets, our referral process is usually, we have an intake data online where you can reach out to. You can also send an email of the veteran that needs services. You can also email it directly to me. And I guess I can, I can provide more information on my contact information as well as my email. And then from there, our intake and data specialist will do an assessment on the client. And usually what we do is we want to enroll them into our traditional SSVF program, only because not everyone that is in our SSVF program will qualify or is able to be transferred to our shallow subsidy or receive shallow subsidized services due to maybe not following program, or they're unable to increase their income to be able to pay that portion of the rent. But as far as the referral, we'll be able to do an assessment on the client, and definitely we would love that partnership with you as well.
Thanks, Esther. I just want to say that the primary way to receive a referral is through the coordinated entry system. So if you have a VI SPDAT completed with the veteran, if they meet the eligibility criteria, they will get referred to SSVF.
And Lindsay, for if this particular provider is not an access point that can do a VI SPDAT to refer to the CES, what are ways that they can have that veteran be assessed so they can be referred to that system?
Well, I would say they could contact an outreach team or a provider that serves veterans, and they could help with that VI SPDAT.
Thanks. And then there's also another question that just came into the chat and asking if a gentleman was in the Army National Guard Reserve, do they qualify as a veteran, and would they be eligible to get shallow subsidies through SSVF?
I can take this one, guys. So if someone was in the reserves or the National Guard, if they have served active duty time, then yes, they would likely be eligible for SSVF. If a reservist or a guardsman was never activated into active duty, then they don't meet the eligibility criteria for SSVF. So if they have active duty orders and you have the documentation, then they likely are eligible as a veteran.
And how would a provider be able to determine if they were active duty and if they have the right type of paperwork for that?
A DD-214 is a great way to see somebody's service record. For those who don't know, the DD-214 is the official discharge paperwork when someone's discharged from the military. So the DD-214 will show the length of their service, their discharge status. I also lean on my partners at the VA, like Lindsay, when I'm trying to verify if somebody's eligible. So anyone, I think, at the VA Homeless Programs Office can assist you in verifying somebody's eligibility status.
Yeah, and additionally, if they have a VI SPDAT in the HMIS system, I will go through and validate their discharge status so that those that are eligible get referred to the right resources. So if you look, if you have access to HMIS and you look in demographics, there's a veteran validation column that only VA staff can edit. So that'll be, it'll say what their eligibility is or their discharge status.
Just a follow-up for that. No, I was just going to say, Scott, too, I think what Lindsay just described also highlights the benefit of the coordinated entry system. and how, you know, if you have a veteran that is unsheltered, the quickest kind of way to get to the resource is through the coordinated entry system with the VI SPDAT, and their vet status can be verified that way on the back end and kind of streamline all of that.
And
yeah, and our outreach team is really great, where if it's a veteran that's not registered with our VA, oftentimes they'll go reach out and try to locate them as well.
thanks.
I just want to add to that, Scott. So that's for rapid rehousing, but for homeless prevention, I know you guys will be encountering homeless prevention veterans. You can also just reach out to Catholic Charities or US Vets, and we can do an assessment to help them as well.
Thanks, Esther. And actually, what I was trying to ask just as a follow-up is, so I know Lindsay and Zoe both referred to the HMIS and the CES system, but I know we have two slightly different systems in place for Oahu and also for the balance of state for the neighbor islands. So I don't know if you can kind of speak to if there are neighbor island providers that are interested in this. Does the same, I guess, process apply to them as well?
Esther, I'll let you take this one since you guys cover the outer islands.
Okay, so we don't. So usually we do have partners on the Big Island as well. We do have staff in Kauai, and we don't do that. They usually will refer those veterans directly to our partners and also staff on Kauai. And sometimes they'll reach out to us, and we'll be able to assist them just through doing assessment. And unfortunately, they don't do that on the neighbor island.
Thanks, Esther. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify that there are slight differences between Oahu and the COC for the outer islands. So just so people are aware. Then I apologize if you folks have already covered this, but are you able to briefly go over just the types of discharge status that are eligible for the Shallow Subsidy program again?
Pretty easy. It's everything except for dishonorable. So
And
only
they have to have at least 1 day of active duty.
Okay, thanks. So we have about 10 or 11 minutes left in the session. So please don't be shy. If you have any questions for our panelists or questions about this new program, please go ahead. And then for our panelists, if there's anything, oh, there's a question that just popped up. And Esther, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this one, but its question is how to refer people or apply for the tiny home housing units that just came up in Kalailoa at the new Kamauku Kahale project.
Okay, so we do have our coordinator that runs that project, and so her name is Lindsay. And what I can do is I can provide her contact and email information. Scott, I can email that to you, and maybe you can share with the participant there on the call.
Thank you. And then I know actually the rental application for Kamauku was shared on our Oahu Shelter and Outreach Provider call yesterday. So I'll also put in the chat, we did put the application online on our Homeless Initiative website. So I'll put the link in the chat so you can see it. It provides some background and photos of the Kamauku Kahale project, as well as the rental application and just a general fact sheet. And then Esther can also follow up for Lindsay's information if there are people interested in that as well. But yeah, I just put the link in the chat right now. Are there any other questions for our panelists?
Just to clarify, it's not me, Lindsay, it's Lindsay Moore who's in this chat.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
You're gonna be getting all kinds of emails.
Oh, yeah. Not Lindsay at the VA, Lindsay at US Vets.
Yes.
I know there also was a question earlier that Zoe had addressed in the chat, but it was just kind of clarifying the number of households that have been served through the Shallow Subsidy program with Catholic Charities. So I believe Zoe clarified it's 4 households served since 2019, but But again, that was during a pilot project period. So with recent increases in federal funding, they'll be able to serve many more households. And as a follow-up to that, actually, Zoe, I don't know if you can take this one. The question is, with the new funding available to Catholic Charities, what are the projected number of families and individuals that can be served?
Yeah, we're looking between 20 and 30 households. The way that we calculate shallow subsidies actually just changed like a few days ago. So when the calculation changes, our budget projections change, but we're predicting anywhere between 20 and 30 households, hopefully more, but yeah, 20 to 30 is our goal for 2 years.
Thanks. And we've also received just some very positive feedback in the chat about what a great presentation this was and how informative. I agree. I feel I learned some new things today. And I really think, the Shallow Subsidy program just as another tool in the toolbox for people helping to house individuals coming out of homelessness is very helpful. And I think it's a step in the right direction to make sure that we have the resources that we can really address this complex problem that we're all facing in our communities across the state. And we're continuing to get just very positive feedback in the chat. So, thank you to our panelists for such a great presentation, and thank you for those in the audience for your questions. And if you have any final questions, we have a couple minutes left, so feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, we can maybe wrap up a little bit early because I know everybody's probably very eager to get to lunch. But thanks again, Esther, Zoe, and Lindsay, for all the great information today.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Scott.
Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and happy Aloha Friday. And we can end a little bit early, and I'll just get to lunch before we reconvene later this afternoon. And thank you, everybody, and take care. Thank you, guys. Did a great job.
Thank you, Scott. Have a nice weekend.